He saw them coming. 40 miles out. Middle of the night. Black Pacific water. Japanese convoy steaming straight toward the task force. And he couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because officially, the radar mod he'd rigged didn't exist. The brass had classified it 3 weeks earlier. So there he sat, 22 years old, watching enemy ships close the distance on his scope while his own fleet sailed blind. And he had to decide, follow orders and stay silent, or break classification and save lives. December 1944, USS Porter, a Fletcher-class destroyer operating in the Philippine Sea. The ship had just completed a refit in Pearl Harbor, and Radioman Second Class Thomas Everett had returned with something the Navy didn't know he'd built, a modification to the SC-2 surface search radar, extended range, better resolution. He'd been tinkering with radar systems since before the war, amateur radio operator back in Ohio, and when he got assigned to the Porter's radar gang, he started seeing ways to push the equipment beyond its specs. The SC-2 was rated for about 15 miles on a good night, maybe 20 if conditions were perfect. Everett's mod, built from scavenged components and some creative rewiring, could pull contacts at nearly 40. He'd tested it on the way back from Pearl, picked up a friendly cruiser at 38 miles when the standard gear barely had a whisper. He reported it to his division officer, excited, thinking he'd get a commendation. Instead, he got called to the captain's cabin. The captain, the exec, and a commander he'd never seen before. They asked him detailed questions about the modification, how it worked, what components he'd used, whether he'd documented the process. He had. He'd kept meticulous notes, thinking the Navy would want to replicate it across the fleet. The commander took the notes. Then they told him the modification was now classified. He was not to discuss it with anyone. He was not to use the extended range capability unless specifically ordered. They were concerned, they said, that if the Japanese captured the technology or learned its capabilities, they'd develop countermeasures. Better to keep it hidden. A tactical reserve, Everett argued. Respectfully, but he argued. That radar could save lives right now. Every day they didn't use it was a day ships got surprised, planes got jumped, sailors died. The commander's response was cold. Your job is to follow orders, Radio Man, not to set strategic policy. The modification stays classified. You will operate the radar within standard parameters. Is that understood? It was understood. Everett didn't like it, but he understood. You didn't make second class by bucking the chain of command. So for 3 weeks he sat at his scope and pretended the mod didn't exist. Watched contacts swim into view at 35 miles and said nothing until they crossed into the official range. It ate at him. Every watch. Knowing he could give the fleet more warning. More time to maneuver, to launch planes, to prepare. But orders were orders. Then came the night of December 18th. The Porter was screening for Task Group 38. 3. Halsey's fast carriers hitting targets in Luzon. They were running a standard search pattern 50 miles northwest of the main body. Midnight to 0400 watch. Everett's watch. Sea state moderate, visibility poor, heavy cloud cover, no moon. The kind of night where radar was everything. He was scanning mechanically the way you do on a quiet watch. Sweep, check, sweep, check. Nothing but the friendly returns from the task group behind them. And then, at 01:15, something appeared at the edge of his scope. Faint, right at the limit of the mod's extended range. He leaned closer, adjusted the gain. The contact strengthened. Multiple contacts. Tight formation. Bearing 295. Range 39 miles. Speed approximately 18 knots. Heading southeast. Heading directly toward the task group. His hand went to the intercom. Then stopped. Classification. He wasn't supposed to be seeing this. Not yet. Standard radar wouldn't pick them up for another 20 minutes at least. If he reported now, he'd have to explain how he knew. He'd be breaking the classification order. But if he waited, the Japanese would get 20 minutes closer before anyone else knew they were there. 20 minutes. At 18 knots, that was 6 miles. 6 miles less time for the carriers to launch night fighters. 6 miles less time to maneuver. 6 miles less margin. He stared at the scope. The contacts were clear now. He counted 6 distinct returns. Could be destroyers, could be cruisers. Hard to tell at this range, but whatever they were coming fast, and they were coming quiet. Radio silence on their end. They didn't know they'd been spotted. 15 seconds passed. 30. He ran the scenarios in his head. If he reported worst case, he'd face a court-martial for breaking classification. More likely, a reprimand. Loss of rate, maybe. If he didn't report, worst case, those ships reached attack range before anyone knew they were there. Torpedoes in the water before the carriers could turn. planes caught on deck, sailors dying because he'd followed orders. The math wasn't complicated, his career against their lives, but it wasn't just math. It was trust. Trust that the chain of command knew what it was doing, that there were reasons for the classification he didn't understand. Strategic reasons? That breaking it might cause damage he couldn't see. He'd been trained to trust the system. The Navy worked because everyone trusted the system. He watched the contacts creep closer. 38 miles now. Still 15 minutes before standard radar would acquire them. He thought about the commander who'd classified the mod, that cold voice. Your job is to follow orders. He thought about the sailors on those carriers. Kids, most of them, younger than him. Sitting in their racks or standing watch, no idea what was coming. He thought about his division officer, who'd gone to bat for him more than once. Good officer, by the book, but fair. This would wreck him too. 37 miles. The contacts maintained course and speed. Confidence. They thought they owned this patch of ocean. Maybe they did. Maybe the Navy's own rules were about to hand it to them. His finger touched the intercom key. Didn't press. Not yet. He needed to be sure. Needed to confirm this wasn't a ghost return, atmospheric ducting, some freak propagation. He adjusted the display, cross-checked with the backup set. The contacts held solid. 6 ships. Closing. Real. 36 miles. Decision time. He took a breath. Pressed the key. Combat, radar, possible surface contacts bearing 295, range 36 miles, course 130, speed 18 knots, multiple targets. Request confirmation. The speaker crackled. Radar combat. Say again range. The Combat Information Center watch officer, Lieutenant Morrison, steady guy, good under pressure. Range 36 miles, I have multiple contacts, tight formation. Silence. Then, radar, our gear shows nothing at that range. Are you certain? Here it was. The moment. He could walk it back. Say he'd misread the scope, but he looked at the display and those contacts were bright as day. Combat, radar, I am certain. 6 distinct returns. Stand by. Everett could hear the activity in CIC over the open line. Voices, someone else checking their scope, Morrison talking to someone, probably the tactical action officer. Then the captain's voice, sharp. Radar, Captain. Explain how you're seeing contacts at 36 miles. No way around it now. Captain, radar. I'm using the modification. The classified modification. Dead air. 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. Then, all stations, this is the captain. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. The alarm shrieked through the ship. Feet pounding, hatches slamming. The porter came alive. Everett stayed at his scope, calling out updates. Contacts now 35 miles, maintaining course and speed. The standard radar still showed nothing. Wouldn't for another 10 minutes. But the captain had trusted his report. Had rung the bell. The task group commander was on the radio now. Everett could hear it. Porter reporting possible surface contacts. Other ships going to GQ as a precaution. Carriers turning into the wind, launching night fighters. 33 miles. The Japanese ships drove on. No idea they'd been made. 31 miles. Finally, the standard radar caught them. Faint returns right at maximum range. The radar operators on the other ships started calling them in. Confirmation. CIC went from controlled chaos to orchestrated precision. Plots being drawn, vectors calculated. 8 F-6F Hellcats were airborne now, guided out by the Combat Air Patrol controller. The surface group was turning away, opening the range. Destroyers moving to screen. The Japanese never knew what hit them. The Hellcats found them at 28 miles. Dropped flares. The enemy ship scattered, trying to break contact, but it was too late. They'd lost surprise, lost initiative. The night fighters made repeated runs. The Porter's 5-inch batteries never even fired. By 0230, 2 of the Japanese destroyers were burning. The others had turned and run. By 0300, it was over. Task group untouched. 2 enemy ships sinking. 4 more damaged and fleeing. Complete victory. Everett stayed at his scope until he was relieved at 0400. When he climbed down from the radar room, the exec was waiting. Captain wants to see you. Now. He followed to the captain's cabin, legs shaking. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash. The captain was at his desk, still in his helmet. The exec stood to one side. No one else. The captain looked at him for a long moment. You broke a direct order. Yes, sir. You understand that's a court-martial offense. Yes, sir. Why did you do it? Everett met his eyes. Because they needed to know, sir. Because waiting would have cost lives. I made a choice. My career against their safety. It wasn't a hard choice. The captain leaned back. That modification gave us 20 minutes we wouldn't have had. 20 minutes to launch planes, to maneuver, to prepare. Without it, Those Japanese ships would have been inside torpedo range before we spotted them. Carriers are sitting ducks at night. You understand what that means? Yes, sir. You saved this task group. Probably saved 1,000 lives. Maybe more. The captain paused. You also violated operational security, broke classification protocols, and disregarded a direct order. The commander who classified your mod is going to be furious. There will be an investigation. I can't protect you from that. I understand, sir. But I can tell them the truth. That you acted to save lives. That your judgment was sound. That you demonstrated initiative and courage under pressure. I'll recommend retention of rate and no punitive action. Can't promise anything, but I'll recommend it. Everett nodded. Didn't trust himself to speak. The captain stood, extended his hand. Good work, radio man. Dismissed. The investigation took 3 weeks. The commander flew out personally, same cold-eyed officer who'd classified the mod in the first place. He interviewed Everett for 2 hours, went through the timeline, the decision process. Why Everett thought he had the authority to override classification. Everett answered honestly. He'd made a tactical judgment. He'd been wrong to break orders, but he'd been right to report the contact. He'd do it again. The commander didn't agree or disagree, just took notes. When he left, Everett figured he was done. Pack your sea bag, you're going to Portsmouth. But a week later, the captain called him in again. This time he was smiling. You're off the hook. The investigation concluded you acted appropriately given the tactical situation. No charges. In fact, they're implementing your modification fleet-wide. Every SC-2 in the Pacific is getting the upgrade. They're calling it the Everett mod. You're getting a commendation? Everett blinked. Sir, turns out your contact report embarrassed some people. Task Force Commander asked some pointed questions about why we had classified a radar improvement that could have prevented ships from being surprised. The strategic argument didn't hold water when you actually wargamed it, so they reversed course. Your mod is now standard equipment. Congratulations. It should have felt like vindication, but Everett just felt tired. What about the next time, sir? The next piece of gear they classify? The next order that doesn't make sense? The captain's smile faded. You follow it. Unless you're absolutely certain in the moment that lives are at stake and you can make a difference. Then you make the call and you live with the consequences. That's what being a good sailor means, knowing when the rules matter more than the mission and when the mission matters more than the rules. It's not easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't need people like you. The Porter continued operations in the Pacific for the rest of the war. Everett stayed at his scope. The Everett mod was installed on 17 destroyers by the end of January. By March, it was standard on every surface search radar in the fleet. No one knows how many contacts it spotted early, how many ambushes it prevented. The Navy didn't publicize it. Operational security. Even after the war, it barely rated a footnote in the official histories. But on a dozen ships, there were sailors who came home because a radio man from Ohio decided that orders were important, but lives were more important. Who looked at his scope and saw 6 contacts 40 miles out and chose to speak up, even though it could end his career. Who understood that sometimes following the rules means knowing when to break them. Everett made first class in 1945, stayed in the Navy until 1950, got out and went back to Ohio, worked as an electrical engineer, married, had 3 kids, never talked much about the war. His son found his commendation medal in a drawer after he died in 1987, asked his mother what it was for. She didn't know. Everett had never mentioned it. The citation was brief. For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. No details, no explanation. Just a piece of ribbon and a piece of bronze. But somewhere in the Navy archives, there's a report. December 18, 1944, USS Porter, radar contact at extended range, enemy surface force, early warning enabled successful defense, no friendly casualties, and attached to that report is a note, handwritten by the task group commander. This sailor's initiative and judgment under pressure exemplifies the highest traditions of the naval service. His actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic surprise attack. He is a credit to himself and to his country. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. But there's another document in that file, a memo from the commander who'd classified the mod, written 3 days after the engagement. One paragraph. The events of 18 December demonstrate that operational security concerns, while valid, must be balanced against tactical effectiveness. Classification of technological improvements must be re-evaluated when such classification prevents immediate combat application. Recommend review of all pending equipment classifications to ensure similar situations are avoided. It was as close to an admission of error as the Navy ever got. The commander retired in 1946. Never spoke publicly about the incident, but former staff officers said he was different after the war. Less rigid, more willing to listen to input from junior officers. Some mistakes teach lessons, if you're willing to learn them. The broader lesson didn't stick, though. The Navy kept classifying things. Still does. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes because that's what bureaucracies do. Protect information, control dissemination, worry about worst-case scenarios. And sometimes junior sailors are still stuck in the same position Everett was, knowing something that could make a difference, ordered not to use it, forced to choose between the rules and the mission. There's no easy answer. If every sailor ignored orders whenever they disagreed, the Navy would fall apart. Discipline matters. Chain of command matters. But if every sailor blindly followed orders even when those orders made no tactical sense, ships would get sunk. Lives would be lost. There's a balance, and finding that balance requires judgment, wisdom, courage, the kind you can't teach in a classroom or put in a manual. Everett found it. 40 miles out, middle of the night, he looked at his scope and made a decision. Not an easy decision, not a comfortable decision, but the right decision. And because he made it, 1,000 sailors who never knew his name went home to their families. That's what service means. Making the hard calls, living with the consequences. Trusting that your judgment, in the moment, is sound. And hoping that when you're wrong, someone higher up will catch it. But knowing that when you're right, you might be the only thing standing between the fleet and disaster. The Fletcher-class destroyers were workhorses. Built fast, built tough, built to fight. 2,100 tons. 3,800 horsepower, 35 knots flat out, 5 5-inch guns, 10 torpedo tubes, depth charges, and radar. Always radar. The eyes of the fleet. Every Fletcher had radar operators, young men hunched over scopes in darkened rooms, watching glowing traces, calling out contacts, giving the fleet situational awareness. It was unglamorous work, exhausting, eye-straining, critical. The carriers got the glory, the pilots got the medals. But the radar operators saw the battle first, gave the warning, made the difference. And sometimes, very rarely, they had to decide whether seeing was enough, whether knowing was enough, or whether they had to act. Everett wasn't the only one who faced that choice. There were others. Radio men who heard distress calls and broke radio silence to relay them. Fire control men who tweaked their equipment beyond specs to get an extra 1,000 yards of range. Sonar men who detected contacts their equipment wasn't supposed to detect and reported them anyway. Most of their names are lost, filed in reports that no one reads anymore. But they were there, making decisions, trusting their training and their instincts, keeping the fleet alive. The war in the Pacific was fought at tremendous range, hundreds of miles between task forces, thousands of miles of empty ocean, and in that emptiness, information was everything. Knowing where the enemy was, where your own ships were, what the weather was doing, what the orders were. The side with better information usually won, and better information came from better equipment, better training, and better people. People who understood the systems, who pushed the boundaries, who thought creatively, who cared enough to do the job right even when no one was watching. Everett cared. That's what made him different. Not smarter necessarily, not more skilled, but more invested. He looked at the radar system and saw potential, saw ways to improve it, and when his improvement got locked away for strategic reasons, he didn't accept it. Not completely. He kept it ready, kept the mod functional, so that when the moment came, when he needed that extra range, it was there. He'd prepared for a choice he hoped he'd never have to make. That's the reality of military service that doesn't make it into the recruiting posters. It's not always glory and heroism. Sometimes it's years of preparation for a moment that might never come. It's maintenance and drills and watch standing and endless grinding routine. And then, once in a while, it's a decision that changes everything. And you don't get warning. You don't get time to consult. You get 30 seconds to choose and the rest of your life to live with it. Everett chose well, but think about the ones who didn't. The sailors who faced similar choices and went the other way, followed orders, kept silent, did what they were told, and watched ships burn, watched planes get shot down, watched friends die, and lived with the knowledge that they could have made a difference and didn't. That's a different kind of burden. Just as heavy, maybe heavier. The Navy tried to learn from these situations. tried to build systems that gave sailors the authority to act when they needed to, tried to train judgment alongside technical skill. But it's hard. Every service member has to internalize a contradiction. Follow orders absolutely. Question everything. Trust the chain of command. Trust yourself. Obey without hesitation. Think independently. It's a paradox. And the only way through it is wisdom. Wisdom that comes from experience, from mentorship, from seeing what works and what doesn't, from watching sailors like Everett make the right call and understanding why it was right. The task group Everett saved continued operations through the end of the war, supported the landings at Lingayen Gulf, hit targets in Formosa and the Chinese coast, fought through the typhoons of June 1945, participated in the final strikes against the Japanese home islands. The carriers launched thousands of sorties, lost planes and pilots, but they were never surprised at night again. The Everett Mod saw to that. 40-mile radar coverage became standard, expected, and the Japanese never figured out how the Americans were spotting them so early. Never adapted. By the time they might have, the war was over. In the decades after, radar technology advanced far beyond what Everett had cobbled together. Digital systems, phased arrays, over-the-horizon capability. The SC-2 and its modifications became museum pieces, but the principle remained. Give the fleet eyes, give them warning, give them time. That's what wins battles. Not necessarily the biggest guns or the fastest ships, but the best information, used wisely. And wisdom, in the end, was what Everett demonstrated. Not just technical skill, not just courage, but wisdom. The ability to weigh competing priorities in the moment and choose correctly. To understand that rules serve a purpose but aren't ends in themselves. To recognize when the situation demands flexibility and when it demands rigid adherence. That's rare, that's valuable. That's what the Navy should remember about Radioman Second Class Thomas Everett. Not the medal, not the commendation, but the judgment, the wisdom, the humanity. Because at the center of his decision was a simple recognition. The ships on his scope weren't just blips. They were threats to real people. Sailors like him, young men who'd left homes and families to serve, who deserved every advantage, every bit of warning, every chance to defend themselves. And if giving them that chance meant risking his career, that was acceptable. That was the trade. That was what service meant. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. War Force's impossible choices. That's not metaphor, it's literal truth. In combat, you face decisions that have no good outcome, only less bad ones. Do you follow doctrine or adapt to circumstances? Do you risk your people to save others? Do you break rules that exist for good reasons because the situation demands it? There's no formula, no checklist, just your training, your values, and the clock ticking down. Everett had minutes. Not hours, not days. Minutes to decide whether to follow orders or trust his judgment. And he chose judgment. But consider how easily it could have gone differently. If he'd been more by the book, if he'd been less confident in his technical skills, if he'd second-guessed himself, if the contacts had been ghost returns and he'd been wrong, if the captain had been less willing to trust him, any of those factors change and the outcome changes. Maybe the Japanese get close enough to launch. Maybe torpedoes hit a carrier. Maybe thousands die instead of zero. That's the weight of it. The stakes. It's easy to look back and say he did the right thing. But in the moment, he didn't know. He thought he knew. He believed. But he didn't have certainty. No one does. You act on the best information you have, and you hope you're right. And if you're wrong, people die. And if you're right, people live. And either way, you have to wake up the next day and do it again. The men Everett saved never knew his name, never knew the choice he made. They went on with their lives. Finished their tours, went home, raised families, lived out their years. And somewhere in those lives, in those families, in those years, is the legacy. The children born because their fathers came home, the businesses built, the communities served, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, generations that exist because a radar operator in 1944 decided orders were important, but lives were more important. That's the invisible impact of war. The lives saved create ripples that spread forward through time. Everett's decision in December 1944 echoes into the present, into the future. Every descendant of those sailors carries a piece of that choice forward. They don't know it, but it's there, written into the fact of their existence. And that's true for every decision made in every war. Every medic who saved a life, every pilot who shot down an enemy plane before it could attack, every sailor who maintained equipment properly so it worked when needed, every soldier who held a line so others could retreat. Millions of small decisions that added up to victory. That brought people home. That created the future. We live in a world shaped by those choices, and we owe something to the people who made them. We owe memory. We owe recognition. We owe the effort to understand what they faced and why they chose as they did. Not to glorify war. War is terrible, wasteful, tragic, but to honor service, to honor sacrifice, to ensure that the lessons learned aren't forgotten, that the next generation of sailors and soldiers and airmen have the wisdom of the past to guide them when they face their own impossible choices. Everett's lesson is clear. Rules matter, order matters, discipline matters, but they serve a purpose. They're tools to accomplish the mission, and when following the rules conflicts with accomplishing the mission, you have to make a judgment. You have to weigh the cost of obedience against the cost of initiative, and sometimes, rarely, you have to choose initiative. You have to break the rule to serve the purpose behind the rule, and then you have to accept the consequences. He was willing to accept them. That's what separated him. Not that he broke the order, but that he was willing to pay the price for breaking it. He didn't try to hide it, didn't try to justify it with excuses. He owned the decision, made it deliberately, and accepted responsibility. That's integrity. That's character. That's what the Navy should have seen immediately. To their credit, they eventually did. The investigation could have gone differently, could have resulted in punishment. But somewhere in the chain of command, someone understood. Someone recognized that Everett had done exactly what he should have done, that his judgment was sound, that the Navy needed more people like him, not fewer. And so they reversed course, vindicated him, implemented his modification, turned his act of insubordination into official policy. That's rare. Institutions don't often admit mistakes, don't often elevate junior personnel who break rules. But in this case, the evidence was undeniable. The Japanese contacts were real. The early warning made the difference. The modification worked. And Everett's judgment had been correct. So they acknowledged it, gave credit where credit was due, and probably saved lives in the process because other sailors saw that initiative and good judgment would be rewarded, not punished. The military runs on precedent as much as on orders. What gets rewarded gets repeated. What gets punished gets avoided. By commending Everett, the Navy sent a message. Think, adapt, use your judgment. Don't just follow orders blindly. We trust you to make good decisions. That's a powerful message. It builds confidence, encourages initiative, creates a culture where people take ownership of their responsibilities instead of just checking boxes. Of course, it can also create problems. Too much initiative and you get chaos. Everyone doing their own thing. No coordination, no discipline. There's a balance. The military spends decades trying to find it, trying to build service members who can think independently and follow orders, who know when to question and when to obey. It's hard, harder than technical training, harder than physical conditioning, because it requires wisdom, and wisdom can't be taught directly. It has to be learned through experience, through mentorship, through watching examples like Everett and understanding what made his choice right. The USS Porter survived the war, served with distinction, received 11 battle stars, participated in nearly every major operation in the Pacific from 1942 through 1945, Guadalcanal, Midway, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The ship fought hard. The crew fought harder. They lost men, took damage, kept fighting, and when the war ended, they brought the ship home, decommissioned her in 1946, eventually scrapped. But the men who served on her remembered, stayed in touch, had reunions, told stories. And one of those stories was about the radar operator who saw the Japanese 40 miles out and made the call. They didn't know all the details, didn't know about the classification or the investigation. They just knew that Everett had spotted trouble early and the captain had responded, and they'd won the engagement without taking a hit. To them, it was just good radar work. Which, in a way, it was. The best radar work. Not just operating the equipment, but understanding it deeply enough to improve it, and caring enough to use that improvement when it mattered. Caring. That's the through line. Everett cared about his shipmates, cared about the mission, cared about doing the job right, and that caring drove everything else. The modification, the decision to break orders, the willingness to accept consequences, it all flowed from caring, from giving a damn, And the Navy needs people who give a damn. Every organization does. Because people who care find ways, find solutions, find the courage to do what needs to be done, even when it's hard. The tragedy is that war is where that caring gets tested most severely, where the stakes are absolute, where mistakes cost lives. But the virtue that drives soldiers and sailors and airmen in war is the same virtue that builds communities and raises families and creates value in peace. It's conscientiousness, responsibility, the understanding that your actions matter, that other people depend on you, that you have an obligation to do your best, not for reward, not for recognition, but because it's right, because it's what you owe to the people around you. Everett exemplified that, and so did thousands of others. Men whose names appear in no history books, who received no medals, who simply did their jobs day after day, month after month, year after year, who maintained the equipment and stood the watches and followed the orders and kept the fleet operating. They're the backbone, the foundation, the reason victory was possible, not because of one dramatic decision, but because of a million small acts of professionalism and dedication. But every so often, someone like Everett rises above the baseline, does something extraordinary, makes a decision that changes the trajectory, and when that happens, it's worth remembering, worth examining, worth passing down. Because those moments teach us what's possible, what we're capable of, what service really means at its highest level. It means seeing what needs to be done and doing it, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when you might face consequences. It means putting the mission and the people above yourself, above your comfort, above your career. It means having the courage to be wrong if that's the price of trying to be right. And it means accepting that history might never know your name, that your contribution might go unrecognized, that you might spend your whole life in the shadow of others who get more credit for less sacrifice, and doing it anyway, because it's what you signed up for, because it's what's needed, because someone has to. That's the standard. That's what we owe the people who serve. Not just gratitude, not just remembrance, but the commitment to uphold that same standard, to serve where we're planted, to make good decisions, to care about the people around us, to do the hard right instead of the easy wrong, to be worthy of the sacrifices made on our behalf. Everett didn't consider himself a hero. None of them did. They were just doing their jobs. But doing your job well, when the stakes are life and death, when the margin for error is zero, when the easy choice is the wrong choice and the right choice might cost you everything, that's heroism. That's what we honor. That's what we remember. Not because war is glorious, but because the people who fight wars, who make those impossible choices, who carry those unbearable burdens, deserve to be remembered, deserve to have their stories told, deserve to know that their service mattered, that it wasn't in vain, that we haven't forgotten, and we haven't. We can't afford to, because the lessons they learned, the wisdom they earned, the examples they set, those are our inheritance, our responsibility, our guide for when we face our own hard choices. And we will face them, different circumstances, different stakes, but the same fundamental questions. Do I do what's easy or what's right? Do I follow the rules or the spirit behind the rules? Do I protect myself or serve others? And in those moments, we can look back to people like Everett, see how they chose, understand why, and find the courage to choose well ourselves. That's why these stories matter, why they must be preserved, why they must be shared, not as entertainment, not as nostalgia, but as teaching tools, as moral exemplars, as reminders of what human beings can do when we rise to meet the moment, when we set aside fear and self-interest and do what needs to be done. That capacity exists in everyone, but it has to be cultivated, nurtured, inspired. And the best way to inspire it is through story, through example, through memory. So remember Thomas Everett, Radio Man Second Class, USS Porter, December 1944, the man who saw them coming 40 miles out and chose to speak even though it might destroy him. The man who valued lives over orders. The man who understood that sometimes the rules exist to be broken. Not carelessly, not selfishly, but thoughtfully, courageously, in service of something greater than themselves. Remember him. Remember them all. The ordinary people who did extraordinary things, who faced impossible choices and chose well, who served with honor even when honor cost them everything. They made the world we inherited. We owe them our memory, our gratitude, our commitment to live up to the standard they set, to pass their stories forward so that when the next generation faces their trials, they'll know they're not alone, that others have walked this path before them, that courage is possible, that sacrifice matters, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when called upon. That's the final lesson, the one that matters most. You don't have to be special to serve. You don't have to be gifted or brilliant or fearless. You just have to care. You just have to try. You just have to be willing to do what's right when the moment demands it. And if you do that, if you rise to meet the moment, you'll join the ranks of people like Everett, the people who made a difference, who changed history with one good decision, who proved that individual choices matter. That character matters. That one person, in the right place at the right time with the courage to act, can save 1,000 lives. That's the power we all carry. That's the responsibility we all share. That's the legacy of service. And that's why we remember, why we honor, why we tell these stories. Not to glorify war, but to celebrate the human spirit, the capacity for courage, the willingness to sacrifice, the understanding that we're all connected, that what we do matters, that our choices ripple forward through time, creating futures we'll never see, saving lives we'll never know, building a world we can only imagine. Everett built that world, one radar contact at a time, one good decision in a moment of crisis. And because he did, 1,000 sailors came home, and those sailors built families, and those families built communities, and those communities built the future, our present, his legacy, invisible, unacknowledged, but real, written into the fabric of everything that came after, every life that followed, every choice that was made possible because he made his choice first. That's immortality, not fame, not recognition, but impact, consequence, the knowledge that you mattered, that you made a difference, that the world is better because you were in it. That's what we all want. That's what service offers, the chance to matter, the opportunity to make a difference, the possibility that in some small way, your life will ripple forward and touch lives you'll never meet, change trajectories you'll never see, create futures you'll never know, but they'll be there, real, lasting, your legacy, your gift to the world, the mark you leave, the proof that you lived, that you served, that you chose well when the moment came. That's enough. That's everything. That's what we remember. That's what we honor. That's what we carry forward into our own moments, our own choices, our own service, to make our own mark, to build our own legacy, to do whatever it did, see what needs to be done, and do it, no matter the cost. That's the standard. That's the call. That's the eternal challenge of service, to be worthy, to be brave, to be there when it matters, and to choose well, as he did, as they all did, as we must do when our moment comes, and it will come for all of us, in different forms, different circumstances, but the same essential test. What kind of person are you? What do you stand for? What will you risk? What will you sacrifice? Who will you serve? Those questions never go away. They just wait for the moment, the choice, the test, and then everything depends on who you've become, what you've learned, what you believe. What you'll do when everything is on the line and no one is watching and history hangs in the balance. That's when you discover who you are. That's when character reveals itself. That's when service means everything, and that's why we remember. So, we'll be ready. So we'll choose well. So we'll honor the legacy. So we'll be worthy of them, of the sacrifice, of the gift they gave us, the future they built, the world they saved, one good decision at a time.